Hello, everybody. My name is Sunwoo Park. I'm currently a senior at Emory University. I'm a history major and a minor in political science, and I am from San Jose, California.
Hello, everybody. I'm Quin. I'm a sophomore at USC University. I'm majoring in history and international relations. I am from Chicago, Illinois.
Okay, so a big reason why I decided to do this project is because I'm really interested in the Pacific War. I want to focus a lot on relations between the United States and Pacific states. That's part of my honors thesis program at Emory. So I did this partial because I wanted to know how the US interacted in East Asia during the World War and also just the progress of the war itself.
As for me, I've long had an interest in military history, especially anything regarding the Second World War. The theaters of the Second World War that are of most interest to me are the Soviet German theater and the Asia Pacific theater. However, I did not, up to this point, have as much knowledge about the Burma campaign as I did about other parts of the war. So, in part, I wanted to join Pacific Atrocities Burma um, kind of account in order to learn more about the Burma campaign, number one, but number two, to also kind of use what I did know to help the project along and gain experience doing research with primary sources and secondary sources as well.
I think something I found out new that I didn't know before was just how extensive the Japanese collaborators were during World War II. For example, the Indian National Army and the Burmese Independence Army. I didn't know just how big the scale of those two organizations were, as well as the fact that even there were two Indian National Armies, for example, or the fact that the Burmese turned on, for example, the Japanese supporters later on during the war because they're the solution. So I did feel like I learned a lot by interning at Pacific Atrocities Education.
What I learned was the specifics at the tactical level. Many of the specifics at your kind of battalion, regiment, brigade, divisional level with regards to the both the British Army in India, the Japanese um, the Japanese Army, the Imperial Japanese Army, as well as the Chinese Expeditionary Force and the Y Force, X Force and Y Force. Um, I learned the kind of specifics with regards to for instance, the Battle of Quin in northern Burma, and the Y Force's operations after summer of 1944. I learned more specifically about the progress of Operation Ugo, but more generally, I also learned about how the war in Asia was particularly integrated, how events in Burma had a great effect on events in China and events in the Pacific and events in other parts of Southeast and South Asia, which is, I think, been a theme in Asian history, particularly in the last 150 years with the coming of European and Japanese and American empires to the region after the Industrial Revolution and the First Opium War. World War II is kind of the epitome of East Asian, Southeast Asian, South Asian integration, and how one event in one particular area can have great effects on other events in in the region.
And I guess for us, why it's important. So for me, specifically, I found it really important because we don't talk about these things that much. Like for example, not that many Americans will think of Burma, for example, when we think of World War II. They'll think of stuff like the Battle of the Bulge or like Pearl Harbor or the atomic bombing. So in a way, this is a minor theater in some aspects, at least in Americans' minds. But for me specifically, I think it really was a prelude to a lot of the chaos that follow after, specifically the defeat of Imperial Japan. And I think it also makes you understand why, for example, a lot of the Indians and Burmese turned towards Japan, an imperialist country, to fight against other imperialist countries. Because the resentment that filled up from colonialism really led them to become willingly embraced the Japanese cause. So do you feel like it really helps us understand like the mentality of the people who are living in the region and what they were doing during the war?
Personally, I think the Burma campaign is important for a variety of reasons. I think, firstly, it does have a decent influence on the course of the Second World War. There's often talk of Burma being a sideshow or not as strategically important as the Chinese theater or some of the fighting in the Pacific, or even or like Malaya or Indonesia, which are rich in raw materials. And there's some credibility to that, but you have to remember that Burma supplies China. So Burma is how the Western allies get material and supplies to China. That's number one. Number two, Burma does have a pretty serious reserve of certain raw materials: tungsten, oil, rubber, teak, um, which is helpful to the Japanese war effort. And three, it has as a territory, it protects the flank of Japanese conquests in Malaysia and Indonesia, and it threatens both India and Yunnan province in China. So in that sense, at the kind of tactical operational level, it is important. And at the strategic level, it is also somewhat important. This is from the military point of view, the course of the war point of view. But in terms of kind of the general themes of history and of particularly East Asian history, the Burma campaign is also important, as it is a multinational campaign, which, like I said, has great influence on as Sun Wu pointed out, the decolonization campaign after the war, the various decolonization campaigns after the war throughout Southeast Asia. It has some influence over the course of events in China, both during and after the war, as you can see in the book that we wrote. And it also, again, like as I stated earlier, kind of highlights the integrated nature of East and Southeast Asia and how important events in one area of the continent are in other areas of the continent, particularly within the past 150 years, 200 years. For these reasons, I think it is important to study and understand the Burma campaign, as well as with the added on factor of a variety of nationalities and peoples taking part in the campaign, which again is a point that we make in the first part of the book. But this is why the Burma campaign is important and should not be ignored in the historiography of the Second World War, particularly in the United States, where knowledge about it is pretty low.
Yeah, but we hope you enjoyed the report that we made, and yeah, thank you for listening in.